They said I was running from something. Well, they weren't wrong. Not entirely. But the folks of Hartfield, Montana Territory, they only knew the pieces they could see. The silk-lined trunk, the posture that came from 14 years of a governess slapping my shoulders straight, the way I spoke, all clipped vowels and careful consonants, like every word had been pressed flat with a hot iron before I let it out of my mouth. Let me start where it actually begins. Not on the stagecoach, though. That's where most people think the story starts. It begins in a dining room in Boston. Crystal chandeliers, silver polish so bright you could see your own face staring back at you from the soup spoon, 12 chairs around a mahogany table, and only ever 2 of us sitting there. My father at one end, me at the other, and between us, enough silence to bury a woman alive. My father was a wealthy man, not comfortable wealthy, the kind of wealthy where people lower their voices when they say your name. He owned textile mills, shipping interests, a house on Beacon Hill with rooms I wasn't permitted to enter. His study had a lock heavy brass, always turned. I used to press my ear against that mahogany door when I was small, listening for some sound that meant he was human in there, some sound that meant he thought about me when the door was closed. He never hit me. I want to be clear about that. His cruelty was quieter, colder, silence as punishment. Love measured out like medicine, just enough to keep you alive, never enough to make you well. He gave extravagant gifts on holidays, chosen by servants, wrapped by servants, delivered to my room without a card. Wealth without kindness is just a decorated prison. Pretty walls, locked doors, air that smells like polish and emptiness. So when I found the advertisement in February of 1885, a small notice in a newspaper I shouldn't have been reading, I read it 3 times. Ezra Dawson, Montana Territory, rancher seeking a wife, honest work, modest means, land with a view of the Bitterroot Mountains, no promises of comfort, no promises of wealth, just honesty, plain as a wooden fence. I answered it, told no one about my family's fortune, packed 1 trunk, left a note on the dining room table between the crystal candlesticks, and I stepped onto a westbound train and let Boston shrink behind me like a bad dream you finally wake from. The stagecoach pulled into Hartfield on a Tuesday. February cold, the kind that doesn't just touch your skin. It settles into your bones like it's moving and permanent. And there was Ezra Dawson, standing by a post with his hat in his hands, wearing a coat too thin for the weather, with a face that was already apologizing before he opened his mouth. He was tall, leaning the way men get when they work harder than they eat. Hands rough as sandpaper, cracked at the knuckles. I noticed that first. My father's hands were soft, smooth. They never touched anything that didn't already belong to him. Behind Ezra, past the rutted main street and the general store with its faded awning, I could see it the sod house. Small, so small it would have fit inside my father's study. And beyond it, the Bitterroot Mountains stretched to forever, snow-capped and enormous, like God had drawn a line across the world and said, "This is where the cages end. No gates, no locks, no doors with brass handles turned against me." I picked up my trunk. Ezra reached for it, but I picked it up myself, because I needed him to see that first, and I followed him toward that little sod house with its leaky roof and its honest poverty, carrying the weight of a fortune I hadn't mentioned, and a life I was done pretending to live. He doesn't know what I'm worth, I thought, The number in that Boston bank. Maybe here I'll find out what I'm actually worth. The real number. The one no ledger can hold. The first thing I noticed was the dirt. Not dirty. Exactly. Just earth. The walls were made of it. Cut sod blocks stacked careful and tight, with a roof of timber and more sod on top. Patched in places with canvas where the rain had found its way through, the whole place smelled like the ground after a storm, damp and alive and ancient. Nothing like the lemon oil and beeswax of Beacon Hill. 2 rooms? That's what Ezra Dawson had to offer me as a husband. 2 rooms, a cook stove that needed constant tending, 1 window facing east, and a floor packed so hard it shone in places like dark glass. Outside, 2 milk cows stood in a lean-to shelter, their breath making clouds in the February air. Beyond them, just sky. So much sky it made my chest hurt. I set my trunk against the wall and stood there, cataloging. No parlor, no crystal, no mirror large enough to see my whole reflection, just a small square of glass propped above a wash basin, barely big enough to show me my own eyes. I thought about the mirrors in Boston, full length, gilt framed, positioned so my father could admire himself from every angle. Here, I could only see pieces of myself, forehead, chin, 1 eye at a time. Maybe that was enough. Maybe seeing yourself in pieces is more honest than seeing the whole performance at once. Ezra moved around me like a man navigating something fragile. Not afraid of me, afraid of presuming. He showed me where things were kept. The flour bin, the root cellar, the water pail. His voice was low, careful, like he was talking to one of his animals, not because he thought I was one, but because gentle was the only speed he knew. That first night, he laid a bedroll on the floor beside the cook stove without being asked. Didn't make a show of it. Didn't wait for me to suggest it. Just put himself on the ground like it was the most natural thing in the world. A man who understood that a marriage certificate don't mean a woman owes you her body on the first night, or the second, or ever, until she decides. I lay in the narrow bed, his bed. I realized, the only one, and listened. The roof dripped in 3 places. A steady rhythm, almost musical, and beneath it, Ezra's breathing, slow, even, the breathing of a man who sleeps clear-conscienced. My father snored like a man fighting something even in his dreams. This was different. This was peace, borrowed peace, in a house made of dirt, but peace all the same. I got up before dawn, stood at that single east-facing window and watched the Bitterroot Mountains come alive. First light touched the peaks like a hand brushing snow from a loved one's shoulder. Gold, then pink, then blazing white. No frame around it, no curtain, no glass thick enough to keep it out. I exhaled, long and shaky. Didn't realize till that moment I'd been holding my breath not just this morning, but for months, maybe years. My fingers uncurled from the windowsill where they'd been gripping tight, and I pressed my open palms against the cool glass and just let the view hold me. I found my journal, opened it to a clean page, wrote the date, started recording expenses out of habit, but the column was almost empty. 2 cows, flour, salt, firewood. The poverty was so honest it was almost clean. The fortune sits in a Boston bank. 1 telegram could undo everything. I closed the journal instead. Not yet. Let me see what a life without locks feels like first. We settled into a rhythm, Ezra and me, Not comfort exactly, more like two strangers learning each other's footsteps so they don't collide in a small room. I offered what I could without revealing too much. Bookkeeping. I told him I'd learned figures from a schoolteacher aunt, which was half true. I'd learned figures from a private tutor who cost more per hour than Ezra's cows were worth combined. But I framed it plain, and he accepted it plain. "You're good with numbers," he said, like it was the same as being good with a hammer. Just a useful thing, no suspicion. In return, he taught me how to milk the cow's lord. My hands were useless at first, squeezing wrong, getting kicked at twice. Ezra stood behind me, patient as Sunday, showing me the motion without touching my hands. "Gentle-like," he said. "She'll give if you're gentle. Force just makes 'em hold back." I thought about that sentence for 3 days straight. I'm still thinking about it. He taught me to read weather in the clouds. "See that band of gray coming over the ridge? That's snow by morning. The pink ones, they're just showing off." He smiled when he said it, a small smile, almost embarrassed, like he wasn't sure he was allowed to be charming. I watched him with the animals, the way he spoke to them, low, steady, never raising his voice, a hand on the cow's flank before milking, just to say, "I'm here. It's me. You're safe." I'd never seen a man touch a living thing with that much care. My father touched possessions. Ezra touched creatures. There's a difference so big you could ride a horse through it. Then the dust storm came. It hit fast. 1 minute, the sky was hard blue. The next, it was brown and screaming. Ezra shouted over the wind, and we both grabbed planks to board the window, working side by side, urgent and graceless, hammering and holding while the world outside tried to tear itself apart. Our hands met over a plank. Just to brush his fingers crossing mine for half a second, callous against smooth, warm against cold. Neither of us said a word. The storm passed after an hour, left the world coated in fine dust. Everything softened, everything quiet, like the land had whispered itself to sleep. We stood inside the sod house, breathing hard, covered in grit, and the silence between us was different. Before the storm, our silence was polite. After, it was shared. There's a difference there, too. That night I wrote in my journal, perfect columns of numbers up top, what we spent, what we earned, what we owed. Below them, in smaller letters, I wrote a single line, then I crossed it out. But I'll tell you what it said, because I remember every word. He is kind without motive. I didn't know that existed. I blew out the candle and listened to the wind settling outside. We are strangers learning each other's rhythms. It feels like the very beginning of music. The first note held long, waiting for the second to join. My hands changed first. I noticed other things, the way my back ached differently, the way I slept heavier, the way food tasted better when you'd actually earned the hunger. But the hands, that's what really told me I was becoming someone new. Blisters formed the first week, burst the second. By the third week, calluses were coming in hard ridges across my palms where the milk pail handle sat. Rough patches on my fingertips from scrubbing clothes against the washboard. I held them up one morning in that tiny square of mirror and just stared. These were not Charlotte Ashworth's hands. Charlotte Ashworth had hands that smelled like rose water and could play a passable Chopin nocturne. These hands smelled like lye soap and cow and honest dirt. I found the small jar of rose cream at the bottom of my trunk that evening. Boston habit smooth it on every night before bed. Keep the skin soft. Keep the lady's hands looking like a lady's hands. I unscrewed the lid, breathed in the scent, and it smelled like that dining room, like chandelier light and silence and everything I'd crossed a continent to leave behind. I screwed the lid back on, set the jar on the shelf, never opened it again. My father used to say a lady's hand should never show her labor. But what if the softness was just proof of everything I'd never tried, Ezra noticed. One evening, he looked at my hands across the supper table and said, quietly, "You don't gotta push so hard, Charlotte. Ain't nobody keeping score." But I was keeping score. For the first time in my life, the score meant something. The roof got fixed in mid-February. Ezra climbed up in bitter cold, the kind that makes your teeth ache because I'd mentioned, just once, that the drip kept me awake. He didn't fix it to impress me. He fixed it because I mentioned it. Because he was listening. My father had 40 servants, and not one of them listened the way this man with his cracked hands and thin coat listened. I started venturing into Hartfield proper. The real test came at Perkins's Mercantile, when I laid out Ezra's reorganized accounts and negotiated 3 cents more per gallon at the creamery. Martha Perkins watched me do the figures, her mouth set in that flat line she wore like armor, and when I finished, she said, "Well, ain't you full of surprises, Mrs. Dawson?" Not warm, but acknowledging, like I'd crossed some invisible line between outsider and tolerable. The Bitterroot Mountains became my daily mirror. Every morning I stood at that east window and measured myself against them, not for beauty, but for constancy. They didn't care what I was in Boston. They only witnessed what I was becoming. One evening, over beans and cornbread, Ezra said, "You're good at this." He meant the bookkeeping, but I heard something larger, and it made my throat tight. Because I am good at this life, this real, hard, honest, dirt-walled life. And that thought terrified me, because it meant the old one was a lie. Every crystal chandelier, every silk dress, every locked door, a beautifully decorated lie. I knew something was wrong the moment Ezra woke. February 14th, 1885. He sat up from his bedroll, and his shoulders were drawn tight. His jaw set in that particular way men hold themselves when they're carrying shame they can't put down. He made coffee. He always made coffee first, his ritual, his small offering to the morning. But this time his hands were deliberate. Too deliberate. Like he was rehearsing something in his head, and his body was just going through the motions. He set the cup in front of me, sat across the table, and I watched him wrestle with words the way a man wrestles with a gate latch in the cold. "Charlotte, I want to say something." "All right. It's Valentine's morning, and I ain't got nothing to give you." His voice cracked. Not loud, just a hairline fracture running through the middle of a sentence. "No flowers, 'cause nothing's bloomin'. No gift, 'cause, well, you know how things stand. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I can't give you what a woman like you deserves." "A woman like you? Oh, Ezra, you don't know what kind of woman I am." "Not yet." Something broke inside me. Not my heart. My heart had broken years ago in that silent dining room, and I'd spent my whole life holding the pieces together with good posture and careful grammar. What broke was the armor, the controlled, precise architecture of distance I'd been building since I was 12 years old, and learned that my father's love had conditions I could never meet. Because my father gave extravagant Valentine's gifts, jewels chosen by secretaries, bouquets ordered by servants, cards left unsigned because even his love was transactional. He gave everything and meant nothing. Ezra had nothing, and his apology meant everything, because it cost him pride, that place where men believe their poverty is their failure, their worth measured in what they can provide. I stood up, walked to the window. The Bitterroot Mountains were catching the sunrise, gold bleeding into pink. The snow on the peaks burning with color no chandelier ever held. I pointed. "You gave me that," I said. "Every morning." Not morning, morning. Montana had entered my voice the way spring enters frozen ground slowly. Then all at once, Charlotte Ashworth of Boston would never have dropped that G. But whoever was replacing her spoke a little softer, a little rougher, a little more like a woman who'd earned the right to sound like this land. Ezra didn't respond with grand words. He poured more coffee. We sat together watching the mountains catch fire, and the silence between us wasn't my father's punishing silence. It was the silence of two people who don't need to perform for each other. The rarest silence in the world. I am not hiding in Montana. I am arriving. But the locked door of my secret fortune pressed harder against my ribs, because this man deserved to know. And I was terrified that no one would change every beautiful thing growing in this tiny dirt-walled room. The coffee grew cold between us. Neither of us moved to warm it. The storm came 3 nights later. Not dust this time, ice. Freezing rain that turned the world to glass. Followed by wind so cold it cracked the water pail inside the house. I woke to Ezra already up, already outside, and I knew before I pulled on my boots. Bess, our older cow, the gentle one who let me rest my forehead against her flank when I was learning to milk, she was dead in the lean-to. Frozen. The cold had taken her in the night, quiet as a thief, and now she lay on her side with frost on her lashes and her legs tucked under like she was just sleeping. Ezra stood beside her, didn't speak. His hat was off, held against his chest, and he looked at that cow, the way you look at a friend who can't hear you anymore. Not dramatic, just present with the loss. I didn't cry. The Boston part of me, the part that still ran the numbers, was already calculating. 1 cow dead means half the milk. Half the milk means half the income. Half the income means... I opened the ledger that night, sat at the table with a single candle, and went through every figure. My handwriting was steady. My hand was not. 3 months. That's what the numbers said before we'd lose the land. Martha Perkins cut our credit with a face that wasn't unkind but wasn't flexible. Harold says no more account purchases till the balance is settled. I'm sorry. Mrs. Dawson. Then Colton Hayes rode over. Neighbor rancher, big operation, hungry for more. He sat on his horse looking down at Ezra and offered to buy our property at a price so low it was an insult wearing a polite hat. No disrespect, Dawson, but a man's got to know when a thing's beat. This land's too much for one fella and He glanced at me. Didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Some men see women as decoration that sometimes has opinions. Ezra said no, quiet, firm, but I saw the erosion the way his shoulders carried the refusal like a weight added to a load already too heavy. That night, alone with the ledger, the fortune in Boston burned behind my eyes. 1 telegram. That's all it would take? But I'd watched my father use money as a leash my entire life. Wealth made him master of every room. Every gift was a transaction. I was terrified that the moment Ezra knew, he'd stop seeing Charlotte who milks cows and start seeing Charlotte who has money. I traced the pattern of my life. Locked doors. My father's study. Rooms forbidden. Secrets hoarded as instruments of power. And here I was, hoarding a secret of my own. I opened the journal and wrote the figures again, the same ones from the ledger. But underneath them I wrote what no ledger could hold. I have the key to save us. But every key I've ever known locked someone in rather than setting them free. Ezra made biscuits the next morning. I mention this because it matters the way he moved through the kitchen like nothing had changed. Like Colton Hayes hadn't come to strip the dignity off our land. Like the ledger wasn't counting down the months. He made biscuits and set them on the table with butter he'd traded for last week at Perkins. And we ate together in the gray early light. And he said, "Good day for mending the south fence." As if the world wasn't ending. As if there were still fences worth mending. That ordinary courage, that stubborn insistence on tending what you have while it's still yours, is what broke me open more than any crisis could. I couldn't sit across from this man, eating his biscuits and holding the key to his survival, locked inside my chest for one more day. I told him I needed air. He nodded, didn't ask why. I walked to the frozen creek. Needed space that wasn't the width of a sod house, where a good man ate his breakfast beside a lie of omission. I stood at the edge and looked down. My reflection stared back, distorted, fractured by the uneven ice, split into pieces that didn't quite line up. One eye here, jawline there, the shape of a woman seen through broken glass. The Boston Charlotte whispered first. She always did older, more practiced. Protect yourself. Keep the advantage. Never show your hand. But the Montana Charlotte whispered back. Hiding is just another kind of prison. You crossed a continent to escape locked doors. And now you are one. I thought about my father's study. That mahogany door with its brass lock. I used to stand outside it as a girl, listening for some sound of humanity. I never heard anything. Just silence and the scratch of a pen. The sound of a man managing his empire while his daughter stood outside like a beggar at her own house. I was doing exactly what he did, hoarding a truth that shaped another person's life without their knowledge, without their consent, not to protect Ezra, to protect myself from being seen, fully seen, without armor or advantage or a secret held in reserve. I had become the locked door, not the woman standing before it, the door itself. The ice cracked not under me, just settling. The sound of something shifting beneath the surface. I walked back to the sod house. Ezra was mending his only pair of boots by the stove, working a needle through cracked leather with the patience of a man who fixes what he has instead of wishing for what he doesn't. He was humming, something tuneless and gentle. Then he stopped, held up the boot, turned it in the light, and said mostly to himself, mostly to the empty room he thought was empty, "Gotta make things last. That's all. Just gotta make things last." His voice had a crack in it I'd never heard before. Not self-pity, just weariness. The sound of a man talking to himself because the weight of carrying everything alone had gotten so familiar he'd forgotten anyone was listening. He looked up when I came through the door. And he smiled. Not because things were good. We were 3 months from losing everything, and he knew it. He smiled because I walked through the door. Because I came back. Tomorrow, I will open the last door tomorrow. Whatever waits on the other side. At least I will stop being a locked room. Morning came slow and cold. I made the coffee this time. Set 2 cups on the table, the same table where I kept the ledger, where the numbers told a story of ruin I could rewrite with a single truth. My hands were shaking. Not much, but enough that the coffee trembled in the cup. "Ezra, will you sit with me a minute?" He looked up from the stove. Read something in my face. Sat down without asking why. That was Ezra. He didn't need explanations to offer his attention. He just gave it. I opened the ledger, turned to the page with the numbers 3 months to lose in the land. He'd seen them before, but I needed them there between us, because what I was about to say would change those numbers, and maybe everything else. There's something I need to tell you, and it's going to change what you see when you look at that ledger. Maybe what you see when you look at me. He waited, patient as always. So I told him, everything. The mansion on Beacon Hill, the crystal chandeliers, the servants, the textile mills and shipping interests, the fortune sitting untouched in a Boston bank, more money than 100 sod houses and 1,000 milk cows. My father's cruelty, not the hitting kind, but the cold kind. The kind that teaches a girl that wealth is a weapon and love is a ledger, and every gift comes with a chain attached. I told him I answered his advertisement because he was poor, because poverty couldn't pretend, because I needed to know if someone could want me without knowing what I was worth in dollars. I hid it, I said, and my voice cracked on that word hid because it sounded so small for something so enormous. Not from shame, from hope. I hoped you'd want Charlotte, who milks your cows badly and keeps your books and stands at the window every morning watching your mountains. Not Charlotte Ashworth of Beacon Hill. I pushed the ledger toward him. I'm offering this money to save the ranch, build something real, together. Then I stopped talking. The silence that followed filled the room like weather. I could hear the fire settling in the cook stove, the surviving cow lowing softly in the lean-to. My own heartbeat, loud in my ears, counting seconds like a clock running down. I watched Ezra's face and saw nothing I could read, not anger, not relief, not betrayal, just a man sitting very still with a truth he hadn't expected, turning it over the way he turned that cracked boot in the candlelight. Careful, thorough, not rushing toward a conclusion. He looked at his hands, those cracked, calloused, honest hands. Then he looked at mine, calloused now, roughened, matching, only if we build it together, he said, quiet, steady, like he was stating a fact as plain as weather. Equal like, not charity accepted, not pride wounded, partnership honored. He wasn't refusing my money or simply accepting it. He was refusing to let it replace what we'd already built with labor and truth and cold mornings and coffee shared in silence. I reached across the table. He took my hand, callous against callous, equal. The last locked door opened, and behind it was just a man at a wooden table, holding my hand, choosing to build something with me. Spring came to the Bitterroot Valley the way grace comes to a tired heart, slow at first. Then everywhere at once, the snow pulled back from the lower meadows like a blanket being folded. Green came up underneath, tentative, then bold, then shouting. The creek unfroze, and I could hear it from inside the house running water, all even musical, replacing the silence of all those frozen months. We built together, just like he said, equal like. The roof got properly repaired, not patched, but rebuilt, with timber Ezra cut and I helped haul. My bookkeeping brought structure to the money I'd wired from Boston, not a flood, but a careful stream, enough to buy a second cow, enough to repair the lean-to proper, enough for new boots for Ezra, though he resisted those longest. My old ones still got walk in 'em, he said. And I said, Ezra Dawson, your old ones got more hole than boot. And he laughed, really laughed, full and warm and surprised by its own sound. I'd never heard him laugh like that before. I aimed to hear it every day for the rest of my life. Colton Hayes rode by in April, saw the new fencing, the second cow, the garden I'd started along the south wall. He tipped his hat to me this time, not just to Ezra. "Dawson Ranch is looking right smart," he said. I nodded, didn't say a word, didn't need to. Martha Perkins reopened our credit without being asked. "Your accounts are the tidiest in the valley," she said. And that was the closest thing to poetry Martha Perkins had ever spoken. But here's what I want you to understand. The money helped. I won't pretend it didn't. But the money isn't the story. The money is a tool, like a hammer or a good plow. What matters is who's holding it and what they're building with it. What we built was a partnership, not a rescue, not a transaction. Two people, each bringing what they had: his knowledge of the land, my knowledge of the numbers, his patience, my precision, his steadiness, my stubbornness, and laying it all on the same table and saying, "This is ours." I think about richness differently now. My father's richness surrounded you crystal, silk, polished silver, rooms full of beautiful things and empty of warmth. A richness that kept you hungry no matter how much you had. A decorated famine. This richness fills you. I wrote in my journal last night, not expenses. I've got a proper ledger for those now. I wrote something else. I came to Montana with a fortune and a locked heart. I found a man who didn't want my money and couldn't be bought with silence. I learned that richness ain't crystal or silk or chandeliers. It's coffee gone cold because you were too busy watching the sunrise together to drink it. The door to the sod house stands open this morning. Spring air moves through without asking permission, carrying the smell of new grass and snow melt, and something blooming down in the valley I haven't learned the name of yet. I will learn it. I'm learning everything here: the names of plants, the rhythms of land, the sound of a man humming while he works because he's happy, because we're happy. Ezra stands beside me at the east window. The Bitterroot Mountains are catching the sunrise gold and pink, same as that Valentine morning when he apologized for having nothing, and I pointed to the sky and said, "You gave me that?" He gives me that every morning. It costs nothing. It means everything. I lived my whole life behind locked doors, my father's doors, my own doors, doors I built from secrets and fear, and the terrible belief that being fully known meant being fully destroyed. Now I leave them open. The wind comes in, the light comes in, and I am finally filled.